Shane Sharp here, and now I want to discuss with you self-presentation in everyday life. In the play As You Like It by William Shakespeare, the character Jacques, during one of his several melancholy monologues in the play, states, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." Jacques' famous phrase from As You Like It captures the main idea about the next topic that we're going to cover. As you've already learned, people have self-concepts, and social psychologists find that people's self-concepts influence their thinking, behavior, and emotions. Even though people have a self-concept is an immaterial thing that others cannot see, and thus others cannot use people's self-concepts to find out what identities make up a person's sense of self, or of who they are. Because of this, people have to portray themselves so as to give others a particular impression of who they are. To do this, people perform acts of what social psychologists call self-presentation. Social psychologists define self-presentation as the conscious and unconscious strategies and tactics individuals use to influence and control the impressions that others form of them in everyday life. In other words, self-presentation is what people do to get others to perform particular opinions and ideas about themselves. For example, if a person wants others to know that she is a good Christian, she will perform various acts of self-presentation, from simply saying to others that she is a devout Christian, to performing typical Christian actions such as praying, to wear a particular religious item such as a necklace with a Christian cross on it. Social psychologists argue that people are always presenting a self, whether they realize it or not. As the social psychologist Irving Goffman stated, self-presentation refers to all our attempts, both conscious and unconscious, to control the images we project in social interaction. Social psychologists divide self-presentation into two types, authentic and tactical. Authentic self-presentation is when people try to create impressions of themselves in the eyes of others that they believe represent who they truly are, and without concern for attainment of a goal. A good example of authentic self-presentation would be if the Christian woman wears a Christian cross necklace because she genuinely wants people to believe and know that she is a Christian. Tactical self-presentation, on the other hand, is when people try to create impressions of themselves in the eyes of others that will help them attain a goal, whatever that goal may be. A good example of tactical self-presentation would be if a person says that he likes Lady Gaga, even though he doesn't, just because a woman he is attracted to is a big fan of Lady Gaga. In this case, the person makes the impression that he is a fan of Lady Gaga in the hopes of winning the heart of the woman. Many social psychologists who study self-presentation use a theater play metaphor to think about and discuss how people present themselves in everyday life. They argue that social life is like a theater play because it shares several characteristics with a theater play. For instance, like in a play, in everyday social life, people use prompts and other types of equipment and methods, or fronts, to present a particular type of self. According to social psychologists, there are three important aspects of fronts: setting, appearance, and manner. The setting is the actual physical space where people perform acts of self-presentation. In terms of the theater play metaphor, the setting is the stage itself. Social psychologists find that people often use physical spaces to present a particular type of self. For example, people who want to look like art connoisseurs hang lots of in vogue paintings and prints in their home, and people who want to show that they are well read will have lots of books filled with leather-bound books on their bookshelves, some of which they probably haven't even read. People also usually don't want others to think that they are messy or dirty, and so people often do much cleaning before their guests arrive at their homes. One of the ways that people use settings to present a particular type of self is when people buy and place expensive objects in their homes, such as furniture, artwork, and home electronics, so they are a full view of guests. Social psychologists call this conspicuous consumption. People perform acts of conspicuous consumption because they want to show others that they are well off and successful. This is why some people buy a sterling silver tea set when a stainless steel or ceramic one would do. This is why some people buy some chinaware that they are just put on display and never use. And this is why some people always seem to have the latest and usually very expensive electronic devices. Appearance is somewhat self-explanatory. It refers to how people physically appear to others. In terms of the theater play metaphor, appearances refers to costumes and makeup that the actors wear while on stage and in character. People use their physical appearance to present a particular type of self quite often. For example, people sometimes cut their hair in the latest fashion so that they can present themselves as hip. Many people wear clothes with a logo of sports teams on them to show that they are a fan of a team. And a man wears a button-up shirt and tie to look professional to others. Manner refers to all the gestures, mannerisms, and other quirks in which people comport or carry themselves, so to speak, in interactions with others. In terms of the theater play metaphor, manner is the various gestures and comportments that actors do to reflect the self of the character they are playing. For example, to look professional during a job interview, a person might sit with good posture and maintain polite eye contact. Also, like in a play, in everyday social life, there is both a front stage and a backstage. Front stages are the regions of the social world where people present themselves in a conscious and often tactical manner. Just like actors in a theater act like the characters of the play while on the front stage of a theater facing an audience, people in everyday life often present a particular type of self in the front stage regions of social life, such as the living room of a home, the dining area of a restaurant, the sales floor of a retail shop, and the college classroom. While people are in front stage regions, they are usually presenting a particular type of self to an audience, such as guests at a housewarming party, customers in a restaurant or shop, or college students in the classroom. Backstages, on the other hand, are the regions of the social world where people go out of play and stop trying to present themselves as they would front stage. Just like actors in a theater play stop acting like their characters while off backstage, people in everyday life go off into backstage areas of social life, such as the bedrooms of homes, the kitchen areas of restaurants, the back areas of retail shops, and the faculty lounges in colleges, to take a break, so to speak, from presenting the selves they are presenting in front stage regions. Just like acting in a play can be exhausting, presenting a particular type of self, especially in formal situations or in situations that depend on presenting a particular type of self, can be quite exhausting. And people often seek out backstage areas to take a break from self-presentation. Whether a region is front stage or backstage at a particular point in time depends on who the target audience of a particular presented self is at that particular point in time. For instance, the bedroom of a home is a backstage area in relation to guests, in that it is a region where a person can go and stop presenting a particular type of self to guests. But it is a front stage region in relation to a person's romantic partner or other family members, in that it is a region where a person actively tries to present a particular type of self. A big source of embarrassment and annoyance in social life is when unfamiliar or unwanted others come into people's backstage regions, such as when a house guest goes into a bedroom without permission, a customer accidentally enters the back area of a shop, or when a student accidentally walks into the faculty lounge. Because people often act very differently when they are backstage, they feel embarrassed when a person who has just seen him front stage sees his backstage behavior. People also get annoyed when unwanted people enter their backstage regions because they want to keep their backstage areas protected from unwanted intruders. Also, like in a play, in everyday social life there is a script or definition of the situation that defines the roles of people in interaction and guides the course of interaction. Just like a theater play has a script that states how each character is to act toward each other In everyday social life, there are definitions of particular situations that define what identities are at play, what the goals are, what actions are appropriate, and what specific behaviors mean in a particular situation. For instance, the definition of the situation for a housewarming party is to enjoy oneself, friendly mingle with the other guests, and be respectful of other guests. The definition of the situation in a restaurant is that it's a place that a person can go, pay money, and receive served food and drink. Also, like in a play, in everyday social life, people play out specific roles and try to present a type of self that is appropriate for the situation. We call this face. Face refers to the particular type of self that an individual is trying to present in a particular situation. Just like in a play, each actor plays the role of a character while on stage in front of an audience. In everyday life, people present a particular type of self or face that is appropriate for the given situation. For instance, homeowners present a friendly and outgoing face at a housewarming party. Salespeople and waitstaff present a friendly face to customers. And professors present a professional and intelligent face in front of students. According to social psychologists, people in general want to be in face and avoid being in the wrong face or out of face. When people are successful at presenting an appropriate type of face for the situation, social psychologists say that they are in face. People usually feel confident, happy, and content when they are in face. However, social psychologists say that a person is in the wrong face when others receive or learn information about the people presenting face that doesn't mesh with the face that they are trying to present. For instance, if a customer at a restaurant overhears the waiter saying nasty things about him, or if a student finds out that a professor doesn't actually know the material she is teaching all that well, the waiter and the professor are in the wrong face. People usually feel ashamed, inferior, and embarrassed when they are in the wrong face. People strive to stay in face and try to avoid being in the wrong face. When people feel that the face they are trying to present is threatened, they perform a variety of actions to maintain this face and, by consequence, avoid being in the wrong face. Social psychologists call the actions people do to stay in face work. However, people often don't do face work all by themselves. Rather, others also help people maintain face in particular social situations. This is because the emotion of embarrassment is contagious. That is, when one person feels embarrassed, others around also feel embarrassed. Thus, most of the time, it is in the best interest of everyone in an interaction to keep everyone else and themselves in face. To avoid embarrassment, others help people stay in face by practicing tact. Tact is face work on the part of others that helps a person maintain the face they are presenting. For example, others often don't say anything when a person who is trying to present a certain type of face says something that is in the wrong face, as when a person who is attempting to present an intelligent face says something that is quite stupid, or when a person is trying to present a sexy face to a guy she likes, lets out a big smelly fart. When practicing tact, people will at the same time stay in their own face. That is, people will help others stay in face, but only when helping others doesn't threaten their own face. If helping another stay in face, would take that person out of face, they usually won't do it. Social psychologists argue that there are three main types of face work strategies that people use to stay in face. Avoid face-threatening situations, using canned resources, and using aligning actions. The first main type of face work strategy, and the most frequently used type that people use, is avoiding face-threatening situations when possible. The most common avoidance strategy is to avoid people in situations that might threaten to put one in the wrong face. For instance, consider a college student who was considered a nerd in high school, but once he got to college, he became the life of the party. This person would probably try to actively avoid people at his college that went to his high school because these people might threaten the new face that he is presenting. Social psychologists have identified several other types of avoidance strategies. For instance, one avoidance strategy is to keep off topics or stay away from activities that might put one in the wrong face. For example, if a person is trying to present an intelligent face, even if he isn't, he will avoid topics and activities that would expose his lack of intelligence, such as a conversation on the philosophy of Nietzsche or a game of Trivial Pursuit. Another avoidance strategy is to avoid putting others in the wrong face. When others feel that a person has purposely tried to take them out of the face that they are presenting, they often react by trying to take the person out of his or her face. That is why people often don't call out people who are presenting a face that they know not to be true, because they are afraid that the person might react negatively to them if they called the person out. Others also use avoidance strategies to practice tact. In particular, others avoid face-threatening situations by ignoring or pretending not to notice a person's face-threatening behavior. For example, others often don't say anything when they know that a person has said something that is wrong because they don't want to take that person out of face. Others also tend to ignore the gaffes that others do because they don't want to embarrass them by taking them out of their faces. The second main type of facework strategy that people use is what social psychologists call canned resources. Canned resources are fallback actions and statements people make to avoid going out of face in situations with a high potential for going out of face. There are many situations in life that have a high potential for embarrassment, such as a job interview or asking a person out on a date. In these situations of potential embarrassment, people often come prepared with canned resources that they can use to stay in face. One example of a canned resource is rehearsed answers to common questions. An example of this is when a job candidate prepares answers to common questions asked during a typical job interview, such as, what do you think is your biggest strength? And what do you think is your biggest weakness? Having answers to these typical questions prepared and memorized prevents a person from verbally stumbling while answering them, thus helping them stay in face and avoid embarrassment. Another example of a canned resource is rehearsed opening lines. A situation that has high potential for embarrassment is when people go up to strangers and introduce themselves, such as when a person goes up to someone she's never met before to ask him for his phone number. Having opening lines prepared and memorized helps people avoid the verbal stammering and stumbling that happens when people go up to a complete stranger to talk with them, thus allowing people to stay in face and avoid embarrassment. However, people cannot use canned resources indiscriminately. Social psychologists argue that for canned resources to help someone stay in face, their use must appear natural. If it seems to others that a person is just spouting off overly rehearsed lines or answers to common questions, they often see this as evidence that a person is in the wrong face. Also, canned resources used poorly can cause a person to look nervous, unprepared, and overwhelmed, all of which can lead to being in the wrong face. The third main type of facework strategy that people use are what social psychologists call aligning actions. Aligning actions are attempts to verbally define seemingly out-of-face behavior as actually in-face. People often do or anticipate performing activities, whether on purpose or by accident, that threaten the face they are presenting. When situations like this occur, social psychologists find that people use one of three types of aligning actions: disclaimers, accounts, and role distancing. The first type of aligning action people use to verbally define seemingly out-of-face behavior as actually in-face is disclaimers. A disclaimer is a verbal statement a person makes in advance of an action that the person thinks may take him or her out of face. People use disclaimers when they are about to say something that might take them out of face. For instance, if a person wants to say something that others might think is stupid, he might preface what he says with the disclaimer, "I know this sounds stupid, but..." Another example is when a person wants to say something that might sound racist, but doesn't want others to think that he is racist, since this would take her out of the face as a non-prejudiced person. In this case, the person might preface what she says with the disclaimer, "I'm not racist. Some of my best friends are black, but..." Disclaimers help a person stay in face by preventing or at least lessening the potential damage done to their face by specific actions. Disclaimers sort of ask others to withhold any judgment about potentially problematic behavior or statements. Social psychologists have found that disclaimers lose their effectiveness if overused. Thus, if a person keeps prefacing many crazy statements with the disclaimer, "I know this sounds crazy, but..." others are eventually going to view her as crazy. Or if a person keeps prefacing many racist statements with, "I know this may sound racist, but..." others are going to start just viewing her as racist. The second type of aligning action people use to verbally define seemingly out-of-face behavior as actually in-face are accounts. Accounts are explanations people offer to mitigate responsibility after they have performed acts that might threaten their face. The key difference between a disclaimer and an account is that people use disclaimers before saying or doing something that might threaten their face, while people use accounts after they have already said or done something that threatens their face. Social psychologists have identified two major types of accounts: justifications and excuses. Justifications are verbal statements that admit out-of-face behavior but define the behavior as appropriate for that particular situation. An example of a justification would be when a person slaps her friend and acknowledges that this is problematic behavior, but argues that she slapped her, quote, "for her own good," because she was hysterical. Another example of a justification might be if a person kills another and acknowledges that killing another is a terrible thing to do, but then argues that in his specific case it was okay because the person he killed was trying to kill him. In both of these cases, the people acknowledge that what they did is usually wrong, but argue that in that specific case it was appropriate or right. Excuses, on the other hand, are verbal statements that acknowledge out-of-face behavior but deny responsibility for that behavior. An example of an excuse is when a person is late, but he argues that he is not responsible for his lateness because his car broke down. Another example is when a student turns in a paper late, but then argues that she is turning the paper in late because she was violently ill the last few days. In both of these cases, the people acknowledge the problematic behavior, but then argue that they are not responsible for the behavior because of mitigating circumstances. The third type of aligning action people use to verbally define seemingly out-of-face behavior as actually in-face is role distancing. Role distancing is when a person explains his or her out-of-face behavior by attributing the behavior to the roles that he or she is occupying at the time. Role distancing helps people stay in face by placing the blame for their problematic behavior not on themselves personally, but rather on the obligations and expectations of the roles that they are occupying in a particular situation. A good example of role distancing occurs when college professors have to fail students in their courses. Despite what most students might think, most college professors don't like failing students. College professors often hate being the bearers of bad news. Nevertheless, some students don't do well enough in the courses to receive a passing grade and thus have to be failed. When failed students complain, the professor will often tell them, I did not enjoy giving you a failing grade, but as a college professor, I am obligated to give you the grade that you earn in this course, thus blaming the giving of the failing grade not on themselves personally, but on the role that they are occupying, i.e., professor. Now, sometimes a person tries to present a face that is not in that person's best interest. A person tries to act smart even when everybody else knows that he is not. Or a person thinks he has the good looks and sharp personality to ask a woman on a date that is seriously out of his league. In these cases, others will try to cool out the person. Cooling out occurs when a person gently persuades another person who is not presenting a particular type of face very well to accept and present a less desirable, though still reasonable, face. Others try to cool out a person when they want to be friendly to the person and not embarrass them. A good example of cooling out is when a college advisor tries to convince a student in a nice, consoling, and polite way that they should get out of the pre-med program because they are not doing well in the program and major in something else. Other times a person presents a face that others just will not accept because the face presented is just too far from the reality of the situation. In these cases, others perform what we call identity degradation. Identity degradation is the process of destroying face and forcing a person to accept a less desirable face. Others perform identity degradation when people just don't get that they are presenting a face that others just will not accept, such as when a person finally just lets her friend know that she is not smart enough to perform well in a trivia contest. Identity degradation is one of the ways that people are punished in society. Taking away a person's face through dramatic ceremonies like criminal sentencing trials and impeachment hearings is supposed to cause offenders to feel shame, guilt, and embarrassment. For example, consider the sentencing trial of David Scott, a 26-year-old man and self-described ninja who raped and killed a woman. During his sentencing trial, the mother of the murdered woman said the following to him, quote, "So you think you're a ninja? Get real. This is not feudal Japan, and even if it were, you could never be a ninja because you're a coward. You sneaked around at night, dressed in dark clothing, carrying weapons, and preyed on innocent, defenseless women. You raped and killed for the false sense of power it gave you. You're more like a dirty, disgusting cockroach that slips between the walls at night and contaminates everything." Now, in a variety of situations in everyday life, people want others to form particular types of impressions of them because they want something from these others, such as a job, a phone number, or any other incentive. In these cases, people often perform tactical impression management, which, as you've already learned, is when people try to form impressions in others that will help them achieve a goal of some kind. Social psychologists have identified a number of strategies of tactical self-presentation. I'm going to talk about 7 of these: opinion conformity, other enhancement, self-enhancement, self-deprecation, supplication, exemplification, and intimidation. The first strategy of tactical self-presentation is opinion conformity. Opinion conformity is when a person expresses an insincere agreement with another's opinion in order to get the other person to form a favorable impression of him. Although opinion conformity may be authentic in that the person actually shares the opinion with others, opinion conformity is often not, but rather a way to get in another's good graces, so to speak. A good example of opinion conformity would be if one of you said to me, "Sure, Dr. Sharp, social psychology really is cool, even though you really didn't think that. But you were just saying so because you thought maybe that'll help you get a good grade in this class." Opinion conformity often happens on first dates. Many people on a first date will say they like or dislike the same things that his or her date does in order to impress the date and perhaps get asked out on another date. Social psychologists find that opinion conformity works when it is directed at social equals and lowers, but not so much when it is directed at social uppers. For example, opinion conformity is more likely to work as a strategy of tactical self-presentation if a person directs it at a fellow college student a social equal, or a high school dropout, a social lower, but not so much with a college professor, a social upper. This is because social uppers are wary that social lowers are always conforming to their opinions just to get them to like them, just to kiss their butts, basically. The second strategy of tactical self-presentation is other enhancement. Other enhancement is when a person says disingenuously nice and flattering things about another in order to get another to form a favorable impression of her. In short, other enhancement is a fancy word for disingenuous flattery. A good example of other enhancement would be if you were to say to me, "Why, Dr. Sharp, that sure is a nice shirt or tie you got on there," even if you think the tie or shirt I'm wearing is hideous. And you said that to me just to get in my good graces, in the hopes of receiving perhaps a higher grade. Other enhancement also often occurs on first dates. A person on a first date often says flattering things about the date's appearance, choice of clothing, or what have you in order to secure a second date. Social psychologists find that other enhancement works. Several studies show that people tend to believe it when others give them compliments or flatter them. And people also tend to like other enhancers more than those that don't other enhance. Other enhancement works because it verifies people's very positive self-concepts. The third strategy of tactical self-presentation is self-enhancement. Self-enhancement is when a person advertises and displays his or her admirable qualities and accomplishments in order to get other people to form a favorable impression of him. To use a personal example, I may want to impress certain people by saying to them, "Well, I don't mean to brag, but my research has been featured in magazines such as Redbook, Time, and on news programs such as Fox News and MSNBC. With this statement, I have shown myself to be humble by saying I don't mean to brag, the famous humble brag, while at the same time displaying my accomplishments of having my research written and talked about in major media outlets." Self-enhancement also often occurs on first dates. People want their dates to think they are worthy of enough of a second date, so they try to display their admirable qualities or attributes somehow, such as wearing something that shows off one's attractive body, or slipping talk into the conversation of one's positive attributes. Here's a good example of self-enhancement. In British middle-class society of yesteryear, it was a sign of importance, prestige, and wealth if a family had their own wine cellar. To make their guests believe that they actually had a wine cellar, often these people would go through a closet door, often underneath the stairs of the flat that they lived in, where Harry Potter lived, and close the door and pretend that they were going down a set of stairs to a wine cellar, when in fact they were just doing that fake stair thing that people sometimes do. Right? Just to make themselves seem richer or more well off than they actually were. The fourth strategy of tactical self-presentation is self-deprecation. Self-deprecation is when a person makes deprecating and critical claims about themselves in order to get others to form favorable impressions of him. A good example of self-deprecation is if I said, "Aw, shucks, I'm an okay professor, but there is room for improvement." Here I am self-deprecating because I am acknowledging something critical about myself. Both self-enhancement and self-deprecation have to be used in moderation. Too much self-enhancement often leads to being discredited. That is, the more a person talks the talk, the more likely she's going to be asked to walk the walk, which often leads to her being embarrassed and discredited. On the other hand, if a person uses self-deprecation too much, people actually start to believe him. That is, if a person keeps telling others that he's not all that great, they're actually going to start believing that he's not all that great. Social psychologists find that when put to the test, it's better to be self-deprecating than to be self-enhancing if you want to form positive impressions in other people. For example, social psychologists have found that group members like people more who took the blame for the group's failures but gave credit for successes to others in the group. The fifth strategy of tactical self-presentation is supplication. Supplication is when a person performs actions and says things that make them look needy and helpless in the eyes of others. Supplication works as a strategy of tactical self-presentation because others are more likely to help someone who seems like they are really in need. A good example of supplication is when a student tells a professor, "My grandma just died and I am distraught. Can I have an extension on the paper that's due tomorrow?" This makes the professor feel sorry for the student, and the professor is likely to give the student an extension. The sixth strategy of tactical self-presentation is exemplification. Exemplification is when a person performs actions and says things that are exemplary of a particular role they are inhabiting in order to make herself look good in the eyes of others. A good example of exemplification would be when a student does everything and behaves in a way that a supposedly good student is supposed to behave in order to impress the professor. The seventh strategy of tactical self-presentation is intimidation. Intimidation is when a person performs threatening actions and says angry things in order to get other people to do things in that person's best interests. Bullies in school use intimidation all the time to get lunch money and other things out of other kids. Bouncers at nightclubs also use intimidation as a tactical self-presentation strategy. That's why most bouncers at clubs are very big and are muscular fellows who look like they could rip a Chicago phone book in half with their bare hands. Now, as in most things in life, there are differences in how well people perform tactical self-presentation and their willingness to perform tactical self-presentation. Some people seem to have the ability to present any face that they want to in any situation, while other people have a lot of trouble presenting a face that is different from the one they actually like to present. Some people will present any face that they think will get them what they want, while others are unwilling to do such a thing. Social psychologists capture these differences in ability and willingness to perform tactical self-presentation by dividing people into two general types: high self-monitors and low self-monitors. On the one hand, high self-monitors are people who carefully monitor their presentation of self and easily adjust their presentations to meet situational demands and the desires of others. In other words, these are people who are good at tactical self-presentation. An example of a high self-monitor is a person who seems like a different person in different contexts, like a stereotypical social butterfly. On the other hand, low self-monitors are people who do not carefully monitor their presentation of self and do not easily adjust their presentations to meet situational demands and the desires of others. In other words, these are people who are terrible at tactical self-presentation. Television comedies often have characters that are low self-monitors, such as Frank on Everybody Loves Raymond, Kramer on Seinfeld, Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory, and Dwight Schrute on The Office. These characters often produce laughs because of the fact that they are low self-monitors, because they are characters that will say or do inappropriate things in certain situations because of their poor tactical self-presentation ability. Social psychologists find that high self-monitors and low self-monitors tend to migrate into different types of careers. High self-monitors tend to migrate into professions that require a great deal of tactical self-presentation, such as salespeople, actors, politicians, and trial lawyers. Low self-monitors tend to migrate into professions that don't require much, if any, tactical self-presentation, like computer programmers, engineers, or patent lawyers. People want to present a particular type of face so that they can make a good impression on others. However, sometimes the things people do to present a certain face can have negative consequences for their health and for their physical appearance. First, consider smoking tobacco. Tobacco contains nicotine, which is highly addictive, and prolonged consumption of tobacco can be quite bad for one's physical appearance, causing premature wrinkling and the yellowing of teeth. More consequentially, prolonged exposure to tobacco can cause many physical ailments, such as coronary heart disease, various forms of cancer, and emphysema. However, many people begin smoking for self-presentation reasons. Social psychologists have found that most people first try tobacco in contexts in which they want others to view them as adventurous, sociable, and, for the lack of a better term, cool. Many teenagers and young adults also first try tobacco to fit in with a particular friendship clique. Teenagers and young adults also use tobacco to present a face that is autonomous from their parents. People also use tobacco to reduce their anxiety in social situations where they fear that they may go into the wrong face. Moreover, many teenage girls and young adult women say that they smoke because it is a good way to control their weight. And many say that they are fearful of quitting smoking because they fear that they will gain weight. Social psychologists have also found that many people often don't practice safe sex techniques because of self-presentation issues. As you are hopefully aware, practicing unsafe sex can lead to sexually transmitted diseases such as chlamydia, herpes, and the HIV virus, and unwanted pregnancies. Many people argue that it is the lack of sex education that is the cause of people not practicing safe sex. However, many social psychologists argue that self-presentation issues also play a role in people not practicing safe sex. For example, social psychologists find that many people fail to use condoms because of how they will be seen by others if they buy, have, or talk about condoms with their sexual partners. Studies show that somewhere between 30 and 60% of people, especially teenagers and women, are embarrassed to buy condoms. Many women don't like carrying condoms on them just in case the mood arises because they don't want their sexual partners to see them as potentially sexually promiscuous. Also, many people who are with a new sexual partner are afraid that their partners will imply that since they had a condom on them, that they anticipated sex that night. Also, many homosexual men say that they have unprotected anal intercourse because they fear that their partners will think that they are wimps and unmasculine if they insist on using protection. Also, many people believe that if they insist on condom use, their partner will actually think that they have a sexually transmitted disease. In fact, some people who knowingly have a sexually transmitted disease don't insist on condom use because they don't want their partners to think that they actually have a sexually transmitted disease. Thus, they are knowingly exposing people to their sexually transmitted disease because of issues of self-presentation. Another way that self-presentation issues can be hazardous to people's health and appearance concerns sunbathing to develop tan skin. Many Americans regularly sunbathe and sit in tanning beds to achieve a healthy glow to look physically attractive. However, exposure to UVA and UVB rays can lead to premature wrinkling and skin cancer. In fact, skin cancer is the most common form of cancer in the United States, and some estimate that 1 in 5 people will develop skin cancer at some point in their lives. This is mostly because of voluntary exposure to UVA and UVB rays. Another way that self-presentation issues can be hazardous to people's health and appearance concerns cosmetic medical procedures. Many Americans have cosmetic procedures such as chemical peels, laser hair removals, and plastic surgery to make themselves look younger and more physically attractive. For example, in 2014 there were over 14 million surgical and non-surgical cosmetic procedures conducted in the United States. Women overwhelmingly have the most procedures done. 91% of all cosmetic procedures are done on women. While people have cosmetic procedures done to make themselves more attractive, these procedures can lead to health complications. For instance, Botox injections to reduce face wrinkles can lead to facial paralysis. Chemical peels can lead to facial scarring. And plastic surgery such as breast augmentation, like any surgery, can lead to infections, abnormal bleeding, muscle damage, blood clots, and death. Also, cosmetic procedures often don't have the desired effect. That is, the effects of cosmetic procedures actually end up making a person look worse. Here are examples of some famous celebrities. You have Kenny Rogers, on the famous country singer, on the left. In the middle, of course, is Michael Jackson. On the upper right is actor Mickey Rourke. In the early 80s, I believe this picture was. Considered a handsome man by most. And at the bottom right is Meg Ryan, another famous actress. Many people considered attractive. But these people were known to have plastic surgery, and it seemed to have made them look worse. Kenny Rogers famously had botched plastic surgery, facelift in particular, and now he looks perpetually surprised because, that's how they do it. Meg Ryan had some kind of lip procedure, and she looks like she's been stung by a bee. Mickey Rourke looks like he's been, just been in a boxing match constantly now. And Michael Jackson's nose before his death, was just absolute travesty. Another way that self-presentation issues can be hazardous to people's health and appearance concerns the use of steroids. Mostly used by men to enhance their musculature so that they can look strong and tough, frequent steroid use can cause acute acne, shrunken testes, and heart problems. Also, many women go on diets to lose weight, even though it is medically unnecessary. Excessive dieting can have an impact on both physical health and psychological health. For example, excessive dieting can lead to malnutrition, lowered resistance to illness and infection, low energy, and decreased academic and job performances. Many women use diet pills, amphetamines, and smoke to keep their weight down, all of which can lead to ill health. Excessive concern over weight can also lead to psychological disorders such as anorexia and bulimia. Now, self-presentation has changed quite a bit in the 21st century because of advances in technology. For the most part, self-presentation did and still does occur mostly in face-to-face interactions. However, nowadays people can interact with each other through computer-mediated technology, and social psychologists have begun to study how people use technology in their efforts of self-presentation. For example, consider email addresses where users choose their own email address, like Yahoo Mail or Gmail. People often present a particular type of self through their email addresses, like their interests and their personalities. A person whose email address, for example, is walterwhiteisgod@gmail.com would be indicating to others that he is a big fan of the television show Breaking Bad. A person whose email address is knitterforlife@yahoo.com is probably an avid knitter and probably is knitting a sweater as we speak. Also, people often take into account self-presentation concerns when deciding which email account to use when interacting with others via email. Many people have several email addresses, and people often carefully choose which account to send their emails from so as to maintain face. For instance, I have my professional email account here at NIU, shanesharp@niu.edu, and I make sure to use this address when communicating with others at NIU or other professionals at other universities and organizations across the country. I do this because I want to present a professional face to these others when interacting with them through email. Online chat rooms allow people to present themselves in ways that would be near impossible in face-to-face interactions. Online chat rooms and other forms of internet communication where a person is virtually anonymous provide people with the opportunity to present themselves to others that is not constrained by their physical appearance or any prior knowledge. Because of this, people can present many different types of self that they couldn't do in face-to-face interactions. For example, I could present myself as a 65-year-old black woman in an online chat room, but this would be hard for me to do in a face-to-face interaction. This is what draws many people to participate in online chat rooms, the ability to present a face to others that is virtually unconstrained by physical appearance or prior knowledge. Moreover, anonymous message and comment boards on the internet allow people to express opinions, which can be sometimes very hateful, that they would not dare express in a face-to-face interaction or even on a platform where they could be identified, lest they risk being in the wrong face. When people are anonymous, they tend to do things that they would never do if they could be identified. And the internet provides many opportunities for people to espouse opinions and ideas and behave in ways that they would never do in face-to-face interactions. Also, having the latest technological gadgets such as the newest iPhone, iPad, Android phone, video game system allows people to convey to others that they have status, wealth, and are on the cutting edge of what's fashionable. By having the latest technological gadget, one can say that they are rich, powerful, or on the cutting edge without having to say a word. Why else would people wait long hours or even days in line to get the latest iPhone or another Apple gadget? It isn't because these people desperately need a phone or need a new computer. They probably most likely already have them. Rather, they do this so they can have them first, so they can seem to others as that they are on the vanguard of the latest technological trend. One type of modern technology where self-presentation concerns are at the forefront are social networking and media websites like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. These sites, as most of you probably know, allow you to link up your personal account to others so that you can share information with them about your comings and goings and opinions. Every Facebook user, for example, creates a profile page that allows them to share information with their friends or people they allow to see their profile page. While many people enjoy these websites because it allows them to easily share information instantaneously with many others who are spread out all across the country or even the globe, these websites present their own self-presentation issues. Social psychologists have investigated the types of faces people tend to present on social networking sites. They have found that at least on Facebook, people tend to present a face that has three major characteristics. First, they try to present a face that is popular, which they do by having a multitude of so-called friends, many of whom they actually don't even really know, and by posting many pictures of themselves hanging out and doing activities with other people. Second, people present a face that is well-rounded on their Facebook profile pages. They do this by listing many hobbies and interests. Finally, people present a face that is thoughtful or deep, as it were. They do this by writing down seemingly deep and profound quotes on their Facebook pages. The vast majority of the time, these deep and profound quotes are written by others, even though people often don't know the person who actually first said the quote. Of course, on LinkedIn, most people try to present a very professional and competent face, since they often use this networking site to find professional employment. It would probably be very foolish for a person to post a picture of himself hitting a bong on LinkedIn, unless of course he's trying to get a job as a bong tester or salesperson. We also see people employing face work strategies that help them maintain face on these social networking sites. For instance, on Twitter, users have the option of blocking certain other users from seeing their tweets. On Facebook, people can set their privacy settings so that only certain people can see their profile, and they can even set it to allow only certain people to see certain posts. This is especially important for many people given that they are friends with different groups of people in which they present different faces. Users can even make it where their profile will not even come up in search results. All this, of course, is done in order to maintain face. In particular, these privacy settings allow users to avoid face-threatening situations, like a college student allowing his great Aunt Bertha to see a picture of him doing a beer bong, or an intern allowing her employer to view photographic evidence of her playing hooky from work and instead going to a Cubs game. Speaking of employers, many of them will actually go try and view your Facebook account, and many of them will even outright say that they want your email and password so that they can view your Facebook page without any privacy limitations. That's why many people who are about to enter the job market often will delete their Facebook profiles. A Facebook profile can't put one in the wrong face if the profile doesn't exist. And I even know of some cases where people have more than one Facebook profile, and they'll share one with potential employers, but they won't share the other one with them. People employ privacy settings and other options on social networking sites as Facebook strategies because they are well aware and are fearful that the information posted on these websites can lead to them being in the wrong face. One off-color, offensive, or stupid tweet of a little-known person can become viral and literally ruin someone's life. This happened to Justine Sacco. In 2013, she was taking a trip to South Africa to visit some family. Right before she boarded the plane, she tweeted, quote, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white," unquote. She had only 170 followers at the time, but the website Gawker retweeted it, and she incurred the rage of many for this offensive tweet. She received death threats and was ultimately fired from her job. Also, people have to be very careful on Facebook nowadays because of the news feeds and other postings, information about them. Often others will tag photos of their friends, not realizing or even caring that these friends might not want others seeing them in such situations because it would put them in the wrong face. That's why I know several people, again, perhaps you do too, who have more than one Facebook account, one for their friends and perhaps another one for family members and employers. You might say that one of these accounts perhaps is the service of tactical self-presentation, the other perhaps in the service of authentic self-presentation. Now, people more or less want to present a self that is more or less positive. In other words, people want others to form good impressions of them, either for personal reasons or to achieve some goal. For many people, presenting a positive self is something that is relatively easy to do. It is in their control. However, there are some people in society that have a difficult time presenting a positive self. These individuals have what social psychologists call stigma. A stigma is an individual attribute that is viewed very negatively by others. A stigma spoils an individual's space. That is, people have a hard time presenting a positive self-image to others when they have a stigma. The reason for this is that people associate certain stigmas with other negative personality traits or characteristics. For example, being Muslim in the United States is stigmatizing, especially after the events of 9/11. Unfortunately, many people associate Islam with political extremism and religious fanaticism, even though most Muslims are very peaceful people. Nevertheless, being Muslim in today's social and political environment represents a stigma. Cultures and specific sections of a society have different ideas about what attributes are considered stigma. For example, in the rural deep south of Alabama, it is particularly stigmatizing to be homosexual. This is not so, however, on Castro Street in San Francisco or Boys Town in Chicago. Also, some cultures view homosexual behavior as ordinary, while others see it as stigmatizing. What attributes are considered a stigma varies over time and is often a result of social and political trends occurring at the time. For example, being a Muslim wasn't particularly stigmatizing in the U.S. until after the events of 9/11. Also, the Irish used to be stigmatized in 19th century America, but today few would consider being of Irish descent a stigma. Social psychologists argue that there are three sources of stigma. The first source of stigma is physical defects, such as blindness, physical deformities, such as missing limbs, and having huge scars. The second source of stigma is moral and mental flaws. Child molesters, mental hospital patients, alcoholics, the homeless, and atheists all have this type of stigma. The third source of stigma is belonging to a stigmatized social group. Historic and current examples of this type of stigma include blacks, Muslims, gypsies, Jews, Mormons, and homosexuals. Another distinction social psychologists make concerning stigma is between individuals with a discreditable stigma and individuals with a discredited stigma. Discreditable stigmas are stigmas that are not immediately obvious or can be easily hidden. For example, people who've spent time in a mental hospital, who are atheists, or who have been convicted of child molestation are discreditable since their stigma is not immediately apparent when seeing them. Discredited stigmas are stigmas that are immediately obvious, cannot be easily hidden, or are known by most people. For example, people with physical defects that are not easily hidden have a discredited stigma. Also, certain stigmatized social groups that dress in a certain way because of their beliefs, such as Hasidic Jews and Hare Krishnas, are also discredited. A person can go from having a discreditable stigma to a discredited stigma. For example, a man who has been convicted of child molestation has a discreditable stigma. However, people can become aware of the stigma through several means, such as online websites ran by state governments that show the locations of convicted sex offenders, and the fact that sex offenders in many states have to tell everyone in the neighborhoods that they move into about their stigma. Other people divulge their stigmatized status to friends and loved ones, as when homosexuals come out of the closet, as it were. People with stigma use what social psychologists call stigma management strategies to cope with their stigma status in everyday life. Stigma management strategies are the various tactics and methods stigmatized individuals use to lessen the negative effects of their stigma while going about their everyday lives. As you'll see, stigma management strategies that individuals use often depends on whether they have a discreditable stigma or a discredited stigma. Stigma management occurs in both private and public settings. Private stigma management is when people who share a particular stigma discuss potential stigma management strategies with each other. Public stigma management, on the other hand, is when a stigmatized person uses stigma management strategies in social interactions with non-stigmatized others. Private stigma management consists mostly of stigma management rehearsals. Stigma management rehearsals are backstage interactions among people who share stigma in which strategies and tactics for dealing with real or hypothetical negative interactions with non-stigmatized others in public are discussed. According to social psychologists, there are two types of stigma management rehearsals. The first type of stigma management rehearsal is direct preparations. This is when stigmatized individuals are taught and coached on the dominant stigma management strategy, or the stigma management strategy that is the major and most popular way to cope with stigma among the stigmatized group, by other stigmatized individuals. The second type of stigma management strategy is deep education. This is when stigmatized individuals are taught the group justifications behind the dominant stigma management strategy and are given the opportunity to express inappropriate responses to non-stigmatized others. The public stigma management strategies people use often depends on whether they are discreditable or discredited. Discreditable people's primary stigma management strategy is passing. Passing is when a person controls and/or conceals information about their stigma. Social psychologists have found that discreditable people use several techniques for passing. One way that discreditable people pass is by concealing any signs of their stigma. One can change one's name, for example, to make it sound less stigmatizing. For example, people from Jewish and other stigmatized social groups often change their names to hide the fact that they are members of these stigmatized social groups. This happens in the entertainment industry quite often. Performers often change their names to more Anglicanized or English names to disassociate themselves from the stigmatized social groups in which they came from. For example, Robert Zimmerman became Bob Dylan, Alan Koenigsberg became Woody Allen, Sherilyn Sarkeesian became Cher, and Winona Laura Horowitz became Winona Ryder. Also, one study of Middle Easterners who are stigmatized in today's social and political environment conceal their stigmatized status by avoiding wearing stereotypical Middle Eastern clothing and instead wearing stereotypical American clothing such as blue jeans and t-shirts. Also, heroin users, to conceal their stigma, often inject the drugs into veins in their legs so they can hide the needle marks better. Another way that discredited people pass is by acting like stigmatizing behavior or appearances are symptomatic of less stigmatizing behavior or appearances. For instance, a person who is hard of hearing may intentionally act to give others the impression that she is a daydreamer or she is just indifferent. These actions explain to others why she didn't hear them without having to divulge her hearing disability. One social psychologist documented how Middle Eastern people tried to pass as a less stigmatizing ethnic group by trying to create the impression that their skin color was reflective of actual Hispanic or Italian heritage. In fact, one of the Middle Eastern men interviewed passed as an Italian by putting an Italian flag vanity license plate on his car. Finally, another way to pass is by being in the closet about one's stigma, except with close friends, family, and intimates. This allows the stigmatized person to be themselves and let their guard down, so to speak, around a particular group of people. This gives the stigmatized person a break from having to pass all the time, which, as you can probably imagine, can be quite emotionally and physically exhausting. Discredited people's stigma management strategies are varied and often depend on the type of stigma they have. Some discredited stigmas intrude quite a bit on interaction, such as deafness, while others do not. Also, some stigmas are not as morally deviant as others. For example, blind people aren't seen as morally deviant, but child molesters usually are. The ultimate goal of discredited stigma management strategies is to be accepted, or at least left alone and avoid embarrassment, by quote-unquote normals, or people without a stigma, in everyday interaction. Social psychologists have identified a number of stigma management strategies that discredited people use. Here is a short selection of these strategies. The first is correcting the stigma. People with physical defects who have plastic surgery or the deaf who get cochlear implants are prime examples of this strategy. The second strategy is to avoid normals. To avoid awkward and negative interactions, many discredited and stigmatized individuals just avoid normals altogether and just hang out with other stigmatized individuals. The third strategy is to use humor. Many discredited individuals try to use humor to take away normal's attention from the stereotypes associated with their stigma. The fourth strategy is to use disidentifiers. Disidentifiers are appearances and behaviors that challenges normals, perceptions, and beliefs about an individual with stigma. For example, the homeless people that hang out in train stations use the disidentifier of reading the newspaper as a way to manage their stigma so as to not get kicked out. This action disidentifies them because it makes them seem to local authorities that they are just waiting for a train and not actually residing in the station. The fifth strategy is to educate normals about stigma. Often stigmatized individuals try to teach normals that despite the fact that they have a stigma, they are as normal as they are. For instance, many Muslims try to teach non-Muslims in the U.S. about the religion of Islam so that they'll view the religion and its followers as normal. The sixth strategy is to defy the stigma status individually or through stigma organizations. This has happened throughout the history of the U.S. and it is currently occurring. For example, the NAACP began to fight the stigmatizing status of being black in the U.S. in the early 20th century. A recent example of this is the movement to make transgenderism non-stigmatizing through various LGBT rights groups.